The silence of my apartment was a thin, cheap blanket. It covered everything but warmed nothing. Most nights, I'd come home from my shift at the Argent Hotel, peel off my uniform, and sit in the one comfortable chair I owned, listening to the city breathe and wheeze outside my window. My life was a series of carefully managed inputs and outputs, a budget of energy and money that always balanced precariously on the edge of zero. There was no room for error, and certainly no room for want. One was a luxury. It was the scent of the lobby's fresh lilies, the hushed glide of the elevators, the weight of the silver key cards we handed to guests whose shoes cost more than my rent. I managed want by observing it from a distance, the way an astronomer studies a distant, burning star. I could appreciate its light, but I knew I could never get close. It was a job, a means to an end, and the stark difference between my life and the lives of the people I served was a wall I never tried to scale. My routine was my armor. Wake at 6. Coffee black. Walk the 28 blocks to the hotel, saving the bus fare. Work the front desk from 8 until 4, a fixed smile on my face. Walk home. Eat something simple. Read a library book. Sleep. Repeat. It was a life built for safety, for solitude. The only thing that betrayed the deep, quiet yearning inside me was a small, heavy fountain pen I'd found in a vacated suite months ago. It was matte black, perfectly balanced, and felt like a weapon of quiet confidence in my hand. I kept it in the drawer of my nightstand, a secret piece of a world I didn't belong to. There was one guest, though, who chipped away at that wall without seeming to try. He was older, maybe 50, with hair that was more salt than pepper, cut short and neat. He checked in every few months, always for a week at a time, always into the same junior suite on the 12th floor. He never made a fuss. He was quiet, his eyes a calm, assessing gray that seemed to see more than most. He had a stillness about him, a self-contained gravity that made the usual frantic energy of the lobby fall away when he was near. I didn't know his name, not really. He was just Suite 1204 Mr. Croft. But in my head, he was simply him, the steady one. I found myself watching for him. I'd feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere and look up from my computer to see him standing there, waiting patiently in line when he could have easily commanded immediate attention. He always met my eyes, a brief, polite nod his only greeting. It was nothing, a standard guest interaction. But the weight of his gaze felt different. It wasn't dismissive. It felt present. And in a job where I was trained to be a pleasant, forgettable part of the scenery, being seen was a strange and unsettling currency. The day it all changed started like any other. The air was thick with that particular brand of late afternoon tension, when check-in lines were long and patience was thin. A man was at my counter, his face florid, his voice a low, angry buzz that was escalating with every word. He was complaining about the view from his room, a complaint I'd heard 100 times. I paid for a city view, not a view of a brick wall, he snarled, leaning over the marble countertop, invading my space. This is unacceptable. The Argent is supposed to be the best. I understand your frustration, sir, I said, keeping my voice level, my smile fixed. My manager, Mr. Abernathy, was hovering nearby, wringing his hands, his face pale. He hated confrontation. Unfortunately, all of our city view rooms are currently occupied. I can offer you a complimentary upgrade to a larger suite on the other side of the building for the remainder of your stay. I don't want a larger suite. I want what I paid for. His voice rose, turning heads. A few people in the line behind him shifted uncomfortably. Are you incompetent? Or just stupid? Something inside me, a wire I kept stretched taut for 8 hours a day, finally snapped. The polite, professional mask didn't fall, but it hardened. I straightened up, my hands resting flat on the counter. I stopped smiling. Sir, I said, my voice quiet but carrying a new firmness. I am neither incompetent nor stupid. I am offering you the best solution available to me right now. You can either accept the upgrade, or I can refund your stay and my colleague can assist you in finding a room at another hotel. Shouting at me will not create a vacant room. The lobby went silent. Utterly, shockingly silent. Mr. Abernathy looked like he was about to faint. The angry guest's jaw dropped, his face turning a darker shade of red. He was speechless, which I suspected was a rare condition for him. He opened his mouth to retort, to surely demand my immediate termination, but another voice cut through the stillness. He's right. The voice was low, calm and resonant. It came from a man who had stepped out of the line. I didn't have to look. I knew who it was. The steady one. Mr. Croft from 1204. He walked to the counter, not standing beside the angry guest, but creating a subtle barrier between us. He wasn't tall, but his presence took up more space than men a foot taller. He looked at the other man, his gray eyes unblinking. The young man offered you a perfectly reasonable solution, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Take the upgrade, or leave. But stop harassing the staff, the angry guest sputtered, looking from Mr. Croft's expensive, perfectly tailored suit to his calm, authoritative face. He seemed to recognize he was outmatched. He mumbled something under his breath, snatched the key card for the upgraded suite from my hand without making eye contact, and stormed off toward the elevators. Abernathy rushed forward, bowing and scraping. Mr. Croft, I am so sorry you had to witness that. So terribly sorry, but Mr. Croft wasn't looking at my manager. He was looking at me. His gaze was intense, assessing. It wasn't angry, but it was unreadable, and that was somehow worse. I felt my stomach sink. I had broken the cardinal rule, never argue with a guest. And I'd done it in front of another guest, a long-term patron. I was fired. It was that simple. My carefully balanced life was about to come crashing down. What's your name? He asked, his voice still quiet. Leo. I managed, my own voice barely a whisper. He nodded slowly, his eyes still holding mine. I noticed his hands, resting on the handle of his briefcase. They were clean, strong, the nails impeccably neat. Capable hands. They looked like they could build something or take something apart with equal precision. Leo, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. My apologies, Mr. Abernathy. I've decided to take the penthouse for this stay. Please arrange it. He then turned his gaze back to me. And Leo, come up to the penthouse in 1 hour. We need to talk. He didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned and walked toward the private elevator reserved for the top floors, leaving me in the echoing silence of the lobby, the weight of his words settling on me like a shroud. 1 hour. I was going to be fired in the most expensive room in the city. The irony was a bitter pill. The walk to the penthouse elevator was the longest of my life. Each step felt heavy, deliberate. My career at the Argent, and with it my fragile stability, was about to end. I'd rehearsed my apology a dozen times in the staff locker room, but the words felt hollow and useless. I had been insubordinate. There was no excuse. I knocked on the heavy, dark wood door of the penthouse suite. It opened almost immediately. Mr. Croft stood there, having exchanged his suit jacket for a soft gray cashmere sweater. The simple change made him look less like a corporate titan and more like just a man. A very wealthy, intimidating man, but a man nonetheless. Come in, Leo, he said, stepping back to allow me entry. The suite was breathtaking. It was less a hotel room and more a sprawling apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city lights just beginning to glitter against the twilight sky. The air smelled of clean linen and something else, something subtle and warm, like sandalwood. It was his scent, I realized. He didn't lead me to a formal seating area. Instead, he gestured toward a small, comfortable-looking office set off to one side, its glass walls looking out over the city. Please, have a seat. I sat on the edge of a leather chair, my back ramrod straight. He didn't sit behind the large desk. Instead, he leaned against the edge of it, crossing his arms. It was a casual posture, but it did nothing to lessen the feeling that I was being scrutinized. You think I'm going to fire you, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir, I replied. My voice was steady, resigned. He was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes studying my face. What you did down there, he began, his voice measured, was unprofessional. It broke at least a half-dozen hotel policies. Mr. Abernathy would have fired you on the spot if I hadn't intervened. I swallowed. I understand, but, he continued, and the word hung in the air between us. It was also effective. You didn't lose your temper. You didn't raise your voice. You simply stated the facts and presented the consequences. You took control of the situation. That requires a certain kind of composure. I didn't know what to say. This was not the conversation I had anticipated. I am Julian Croft, he said, finally giving a name to the face I had watched for months. I own the Argent hotel chain. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Not a VIP guest. Not a valued patron. The owner. The man whose name was on the letterhead, on the paychecks, on everything. I had talked back to a belligerent guest in front of the billionaire who owned the entire company. My fate was sealed in a way I hadn't even imagined. But he wasn't smiling, and he didn't look angry. He looked thoughtful. I'm here for the next 2 months to oversee a rather sensitive merger. I require an assistant. Someone discreet, efficient, and capable of handling difficult people. Someone with composure. He paused, his gaze unwavering. The position requires long hours and absolute confidentiality. It pays considerably more than your current salary. I'm offering you the job. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. You're offering me a job? A temporary contract. 2 months, he clarified. You'd work from this office. Your official title will be executive assistant, on special assignment to the CEO. It's a significant step up, but I need an answer now. Yes or no? My mind raced. It was insane. It was a lifeline I hadn't known I needed, dropped from a sky I didn't believe in. There had to be a catch. But looking at him, at his calm, serious face, I saw no deception. I saw an opportunity. A terrifying, exhilarating opportunity. Yes, I said, the word coming out stronger than I felt. Yes, I accept. Julian Croft nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of his mouth. Good. Your employment with the front desk is terminated, effective immediately. Your new position starts tomorrow, 8 o'clock sharp. Here, and just like that, my world shifted on its axis. I walked out of the penthouse suite in a daze, no longer just a front desk clerk, but the personal assistant to the man who owned it all. I had stepped through a door I never even knew existed, and I had no idea what lay on the other side. The next morning, I arrived at the penthouse at 7:45, wearing my only suit, which suddenly felt cheap and ill-fitting. Julian was already there, dressed in dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He was on the phone, his voice a low, commanding murmur. He gestured for me to come in, pointing to a coffee machine on a side counter. That first day set the tone for the weeks to come. The work was demanding. I was organizing schedules, transcribing confidential notes, researching competitor portfolios, and acting as a gatekeeper for the endless stream of people who wanted a moment of his time. We worked in a shared space, but in separate orbits. He was the sun, and I was a small planet, held in place by the quiet gravity of his presence. I became a student of his silences. I learned that the slight tightening of his jaw meant a deal was going sour. I learned that a long pause before he spoke meant he was choosing his words with surgical precision. I learned to anticipate his needs, a fresh cup of coffee before he asked, the correct file open on his tablet before a meeting, a quiet closing of the office door when a call became particularly intense. He was a fair boss, demanding but clear in his expectations. He never raised his voice. Praise was rare and understated. A simple, good work, Leo, felt like a significant victory. I found myself working harder than I ever had in my life, driven by a desire not just to do the job well, but to earn that quiet nod of approval. The proximity was a strange kind of intimacy. I was privy to the mechanics of his empire, but the man himself remained an enigma. Yet, I was constantly observing him. I watched the way he'd rub the bridge of his nose when he was tired, the way his eyes would soften almost imperceptibly when he looked out at the city skyline. I saw the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes that the rest of the world never saw. My internal monologue became a constant stream of analysis. Why did he choose me? Was it really just about that moment in the lobby? Or was it something else? I was acutely aware of the chasm between our lives. He moved through a world of effortless power and wealth, while I still counted my change for the laundromat. He was older, established, in control. I was young, adrift, and utterly dependent on his goodwill. The power imbalance was a tangible thing, a third presence in the quiet office. I worried about it constantly. I replayed every interaction, searching for hidden meanings. When he said, "You're learning quickly," was it a genuine compliment or a reminder of my inexperience? When he asked me to stay late, was it a necessity or a test of my compliance? My caution, my habit of living a small, protected life, was at war with the undeniable pull I felt toward him. It wasn't just respect for a powerful man. It was something more personal. It was the low timbre of his voice that seemed to settle something deep inside me. It was the rare, genuine smile that would transform his serious face, making him look younger, more approachable. It was the steady warmth that I felt emanating from him, a quiet confidence that was as comforting as it was intimidating. Then came the small touches. They were always professional, always justifiable, but they sent jolts through my carefully constructed defenses. The first time, he was handing me a stack of documents. Instead of placing them on the desk, he put them directly into my hands, his fingers brushing against mine. The contact was brief, a feather-light touch, but it lingered. His skin was warm. He pulled his hand back without a word, his expression unchanged, but I felt the spot where we'd touched tingle for an hour afterward. Another time, we were leaving the suite for a meeting downtown. I was fumbling with my briefcase and nearly walked into the edge of a closing elevator door. His hand shot out, not grabbing me, but resting firmly on my shoulder, a solid, grounding pressure that stopped me short. "Careful," he said, his voice low and close to my ear. His hand stayed there a second longer than necessary before he dropped it. I could feel the heat of his palm through the fabric of my shirt all the way down to the 23rd floor. I never knew how to react. To acknowledge the touch would be to give it a meaning it might not have. It would be a presumption, a crossing of a line that was both invisible and absolute. So I said nothing. I pretended it was an accident, a normal, meaningless physical contact. But in the quiet of the office, the silence between us started to feel different. It was no longer just peaceful. It was charged, filled with the things we weren't saying, the gestures we weren't making. Each small, ambiguous contact became a focal point in my memory. A brush of our shoulders as we stood side by side looking over a blueprint. His hand briefly covering mine to point out a specific clause in a contract. These moments were grains of sand, but they were accumulating, building into something with weight and substance. And I was both terrified and thrilled by the possibility of what that might be. My life was no longer a flat, predictable line. It was a landscape of shifting terrain, and I was navigating it without a map, following the pull of a quiet, steady star. The breakthrough, when it came, was not a dramatic event. It was a quiet evening in the third week of my employment. A critical deadline for the merger was approaching, and we were working late, surrounded by stacks of financial reports and legal documents. The city outside the panoramic windows had become a glittering tapestry of light, a silent audience to our shared task. Around 9, Julian finally pushed back from his desk and rubbed his eyes. "We need a break. And food. What do you feel like eating?" The question was so normal, so mundane, it caught me off guard. I'm fine, sir. I don't need anything." He gave me a look that was part gentle admonishment, part exhaustion. "First, stop calling me sir when we're alone. It's Julian. Second, that wasn't a question of need, it was a question of preference. You're not a machine, Leo. You need to eat, Julian." I tested the name. It felt strange on my tongue, too familiar. "Right. Anything is fine." He sighed softly and picked up his phone. "Useless," he muttered, but there was a hint of warmth in his tone. He ordered from a Thai restaurant, asking me simple questions about spice levels and preferences, and for 15 minutes, we weren't a CEO and his assistant. We were just two men, tired and hungry, deciding on dinner. When the food arrived, he didn't suggest we eat at the large, formal dining table. He cleared a space on the low coffee table in the seating area, and we sat on the plush sofa, the curtains spread out between us. It was a simple, domestic act that felt seismic. The physical barrier of the desk was gone. We were side by side, our shoulders occasionally brushing as we reached for food. The conversation drifted away from work. He asked me about my life before the Argent. I was hesitant at first, my personal history a tightly guarded thing. But his questions were gentle, born of what felt like genuine curiosity. I found myself telling him about growing up in a small town, about the 2 years of university I'd completed before my mother got sick. I told him about dropping out to care for her, and how after she passed, I'd come to the city with just enough money for a bus ticket and the first month's rent on my tiny apartment. I hadn't spoken about it to anyone. To admit to that level of struggle felt like admitting weakness. But Julian just listened, his expression thoughtful. He didn't offer pity or platitudes. He just nodded, a quiet understanding in his gray eyes. "You did what you had to do," he said simply when I'd finished. That takes strength. His validation was a balm on a wound I didn't even realize was still so raw. In that moment, sitting on that sofa, sharing a meal, we were equals. Not in wealth or status, but in the shared experience of being human. The power dynamic that had so preoccupied me seemed to recede, replaced by a simple, profound connection. Later, as we were cleaning up the cartons, he grew quiet again. He stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, his back to me. The silence stretched, but it was a different kind of silence now. It felt heavier, more contemplative. "You know," he said, his voice low, not turning around. "The reason I hired you, it wasn't just about composure." I waited, my heart starting to beat a little faster. He turned to face me, his expression serious, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. "People in my position are surrounded by two types of people, those who are afraid of me, and those who want something from me. It makes it difficult to trust, to see people clearly." He took a small step closer. "When you stood up to that man in the lobby, you weren't trying to impress anyone. You weren't angling for a promotion. You were just doing what you thought was right. There was an integrity to it, an honesty. I hadn't seen that in a long time." He paused, and I felt the air grow thick with unspoken meaning. This was it. A door was opening, and I was standing on the threshold. "Leo," he said, his voice dropping even lower, softer. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Does my being your employer, this situation, does it make you uncomfortable?" The question was a gift. It was an acknowledgement of the power he held, and an offering of it back to me. He was showing me that he saw the imbalance, that he was worried about it, that my comfort and my agency mattered to him more than his own desires. He was making sure I felt safe. "I am uncomfortable." The thought rises, swift and honest. But it's not the kind of discomfort he means. It's the discomfort of standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall could kill you, but the view is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It's the ache of wanting something so much you're afraid to even breathe its name. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I met his gaze, holding it. "It doesn't. Not in the way you mean." A flicker of something, relief, hope, passed through his eyes. He gave me a small, slow nod, accepting my answer without pushing for more. He had opened the door, and I had chosen not to run. The foundation between us, once a precarious arrangement of employment, was settling into something else. Something solid. Something real. And the quiet space between us was no longer empty. It was filled with a fragile, burgeoning trust. The new dynamic between us was subtle, a shift in the current rather than a change of tides. The work continued, as demanding as ever, but the space was now charged with a delicate awareness. The professional boundaries were still in place, but they felt thinner, more permeable. We talked more, small conversations about books, music, the news. He had a dry, understated sense of humor that emerged in quiet moments, and the sound of his soft laughter was a revelation. I started to feel less like an employee and more like a partner, not in business, but in the small ecosystem of the penthouse suite. We had a rhythm, a way of moving around each other that was instinctual and easy. The quiet moments, once fraught with my own internal analysis, became pockets of peace. Standing beside him at the window, watching a storm roll in over the city, felt as natural as breathing. The tipping point arrived during a cocktail reception Julian was hosting in the suite for some of the key players in the merger. It was a high-stakes event, and my job was to be invisible, to make sure everything ran smoothly, to anticipate needs before they were spoken. The room was filled with men in sharp suits and women in elegant dresses, their voices a low hum of power and influence. I was standing near the bar, scanning the room, when I overheard a conversation between two executives. One of them, a man named Henderson with a reputation for being ruthless, gestured subtly in my direction with his champagne flute. "That's Croft's new boy," he said, his voice dripping with insinuation. "Came out of nowhere. Used to be at the front desk. Quite the promotion," the other man chuckled. "I'm sure he's very attentive." Julian always did appreciate loyalty. The implication was ugly and clear. They saw me not as a competent assistant, but as a transaction, a kept thing. A hot flush of shame and anger washed over me. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, to defend Julian's integrity, but I was frozen. I was a nobody. They were titans. Before I could move, a shadow fell over them. Julian had materialized at my side, his presence instantly commanding. He hadn't been part of the conversation, but his eyes, cold as slate, were fixed on Henderson. He must have overheard. "Henderson," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. A word. He didn't wait for a reply. He simply placed a hand on the small of my back, a gesture that was both supportive and possessive, and steered me away from the bar, leaving the two executives looking stunned. He led me toward the quieter space of the office, the light pressure of his hand a steady anchor in my swirling anger. He closed the glass door, muffling the sound of the party. He turned to me, his face a mask of controlled fury. But the anger wasn't directed at me. It was for me. He was protecting me. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and tight. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. The protective gesture, so public and so decisive, had laid his feelings bare. This wasn't about an employer defending his employee's honor. This was personal. The weight of his hand, which still lingered on my back, felt like a brand, a claim. "I will handle Henderson," he said, his jaw tense. "That kind of talk is unacceptable." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and the anger in them softened into something else, something deeper. "What they think doesn't matter, Leo. Only what's real." The party wound down an hour later. I oversaw the cleanup, my mind a whirlwind. After the last of the catering staff had left, it was just the two of us again, standing in the silent, cavernous living area. The air was thick, charged with everything that had happened, everything that remained unspoken. He finally broke the silence. "Thank you for your work tonight. You were excellent. It's my job," I said quietly. "It's more than that now, isn't it?" he asked, his voice gentle. He took a step closer. We were standing near the window, the city lights a distant, indifferent witness. "Leo, I need to be clear. What Henderson implied, it's poison. And I won't have it touch you." He paused, and I knew this was a critical moment. He was once again giving me the power, the choice. "You don't have to stay here if you don't want to," he said, his voice steady. But I could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "Your contract is fulfilled either way. I'll give you a severance package that will set you up for whatever you want to do next. You have my word. Your choice. No consequences." He was offering me an exit. A clean, respectable, and financially secure way out. He was making sure, beyond any doubt, that I was not trapped. That if I stayed, it would be because I chose to stay. Because I wanted to. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was the moment of truth. I could take the safe path, retreat back to my small, quiet life, armed with enough money to be comfortable. Or I could take the risk. I could step off the cliff. I look at him, really look at him, at the fine lines around his eyes, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the deep, searching honesty in his gaze. And I know what I want. I found my voice, and when it came, it was clear and sure. "I don't want to go." The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of held breath, of a world pausing on its axis. Julian's expression didn't change, but a universe of emotion shifted in his eyes. I took a breath, the bravest one of my life. It's not about the job, that was it. My confession, simple, unadorned, and absolutely terrifying. I had laid my heart bare on the cool marble floor of a billionaire's penthouse, and I had no idea if he would step on it or pick it up. A slow, beautiful softness spread across his face, erasing the tension, the worry. He closed the small distance between us, his movements unhurried, deliberate. He stopped just inches from me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I know," he whispered, his own confession a quiet echo of mine. His voice was rough with emotion. "I was hoping you'd say that." He raised his hand, not to my shoulder this time, but to my face. His fingers were warm and gentle as they brushed against my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. It was the most deliberate, most tender touch I had ever known. He looked into my eyes, a silent question that I answered with a slight lean into his hand. Consent given. Consent received. He bent his head, and his lips met mine. The kiss was not what I expected. There was no fire, no sudden explosion. It was better. It was a slow, deep press of his mouth to mine, a feeling of rightness, of arrival. It was unhurried and sure, a conversation without words. It spoke of weeks of observation, of quiet yearning, of a connection that had grown in the silent spaces between us. It tasted of relief. I brought my hands up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath my palms. He wrapped his other arm around my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. We were just two people, holding on to each other as if we were the only solid things in a spinning world. When we finally broke apart, It was only to rest our foreheads together. I kept my eyes closed, memorizing the feeling of his breath on my skin, the solidness of his body against mine, the faint, clean scent of him. "Leo," he murmured, his voice thick. I couldn't speak. I could only lace my fingers with his, a simple, profound gesture of connection. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. I felt like I was home. He led me to one of the guest rooms, a quiet, beautifully appointed space that was as large as my entire apartment. He didn't push for more, didn't assume anything. He simply pulled back the covers, his movements gentle. "You should sleep," he said softly. He pressed a light kiss to my forehead, a gesture of pure tenderness that unraveled something tight in my chest. "We'll talk in the morning." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. I lay in the enormous, comfortable bed, the scent of him on my skin, the ghost of his kiss on my lips. The silence that surrounded me was no longer a thin, cheap blanket. It was a soft, warm quilt, and for the first time in years, I felt completely safe. I fell asleep not knowing what the morning would bring, but for once, I wasn't afraid of the dawn. I woke to the soft gray light of morning filtering through the curtains. For a moment, I was disoriented, the unfamiliar luxury of the room at odds with the stark reality of my usual mornings. Then, the memory of the night before rushed back. The party, Henderson's cruel words, Julian's quiet fury, the kiss. It was all real. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. What now? The clear, simple rightness of last night felt fragile in the light of day. The power imbalance, the difference in our ages, our wealth, our entire lives. All the things that had seemed to melt away in that moment now came rushing back. Was I just a diversion for him? A brief infatuation? The unease was a cold counterpoint to the warmth that had settled in my heart. I got up and dressed in the suit from the day before, which now felt rumpled and inadequate. I found Julian in the kitchen area, standing by the espresso machine, already dressed in tailored trousers and a soft blue shirt. He looked as calm and composed as ever, and a flicker of fear went through me. Maybe it had meant nothing to him. He turned as I approached, and his expression softened when he saw me. He held out a mug. "Coffee." "Thank you," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally formal. I took the mug, our fingers brushing. The small spark of contact was a reminder of last night's intimacy, but it felt complicated now. He seemed to sense my turmoil. He didn't try to pretend everything was normal. He gestured to the small table by the window. "Sit down, Leo." We sat in silence for a moment, the city waking up below us. He didn't sit too close, respecting my space, but his attention was entirely on me. "I don't want you to feel trapped," he began, his voice low and serious. "Or obligated. What happened last night, it was important to me, but I am acutely aware of our circumstances. I'm your employer. I'm older than you. I have resources you don't. None of that has changed." He was laying the cards on the table, naming the very things that were causing the knot in my stomach. He wasn't ignoring them or pretending they didn't matter. "We can figure this out at whatever pace you need," he continued, his gaze steady and sincere. "If you need space, you have it. If you want to walk away, the offer I made last night still stands, no questions asked. Your well-being is the most important thing here." His words were a release valve for my anxiety. He wasn't trying to possess me or control the situation. He was trying to build a foundation of trust, brick by careful brick. "I think you should take the day off," he said. "With pay, of course. Go home. Go for a walk. Just be in your own space. Think about what you want, away from me, away from this penthouse." He paused. "And I've made some arrangements. There's a small, private office in one of my other buildings downtown. It's ready for you. If you choose to continue working on this project, you can work from there. You wouldn't have to be here every day. It would give us separation. A boundary." Every single thing he said was designed to give me back my power, my independence. He was actively working to dismantle the power dynamic that could so easily poison whatever was growing between us. A wave of gratitude, so strong it almost hurt, washed over me. He reached across the table and placed his hand on my forearm, a simple, reassuring touch. "This is real, Leo. At least, it is for me. And I want to give it a chance to be real for you, too." Without pressure, I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I left the penthouse a little while later, the promise of a conversation later hanging in the air. Walking back to my own apartment felt surreal. The 28 blocks that had once seemed like a measure of my poverty now felt like a necessary journey, a pilgrimage back to myself. My apartment was just as I had left it, small, sparse, and quiet. But the silence felt different today. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of contemplation. The contrast between my world and Julian's had never been more stark. Here, the faucet dripped, the radiator hissed, and the sounds of my neighbors' lives bled through the thin walls. In the penthouse, there was only the quiet hum of perfect climate control and the distant murmur of the city. A friend from my old university days called, his voice a cheerful blast from a life I'd left behind. He talked about his new job, his new girlfriend, the mundane dramas of a life that felt a million miles away from mine. I listened, feeling a strange sense of detachment. Then, on a trip to the corner store, I ran into one of my former co-workers from the Argent. She was friendly, but her eyes were full of questions. "Heard you got promoted," she said, a hint of suspicion in her voice. "Working directly for Mr. Croft now. Wow, you must have really impressed him." It was the same insinuation Henderson had made, just wrapped in a friendlier package. The world would see it one way. They would see a rich, powerful older man and a young, poor employee. They would draw their own conclusions, and none of them would be kind. The thought sent a chill of doubt through me. Could I handle that? Could we? I spent the rest of the day walking through the city, just thinking. I thought about the way Julian listened when I spoke. I thought about the quiet integrity he carried, the way he protected me. I thought about the shocking, overwhelming rightness of his kiss. My feelings for him weren't a product of the penthouse or the money. They had started long before that, when he was just the quiet man in 1204. The one whose steady presence was a small island of calm in my chaotic world. His wealth was a complication, not an attraction. The man himself, his kindness, his strength, his unexpected vulnerability, that was what I was drawn to. I realized that for the first time in my life, I had a real choice. Not a choice between bad and worse, but a choice about my own happiness. I could let fear and the opinions of others dictate my life, sending me back to the safe, gray solitude I knew. Or I could choose to trust him, to trust myself, to trust what we had started to build together. As dusk began to settle over the city, I knew my answer. I walked back to the Argent, not as an employee, but as a man who had made a conscious, deliberate choice. I was no longer drifting. I was walking toward something. Toward him. I let myself into the penthouse with the key card Julian had given me. He was in the living area, standing by the window, exactly as I had pictured him. He turned as I entered, his face unreadable, his posture tense. He had been waiting, and he had clearly been prepared for any answer. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked over to him, closing the space between us. I stopped in front of him and looked up into his worried gray eyes. "I'm not going to use the other office," I said, my voice quiet but sure. "I want to be here." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was like watching the sun break through clouds. A deep, shuddering breath escaped him. "Leo," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "But," I continued, holding his gaze, "we need to be careful. We need to have boundaries. For us. So this can be real." He nodded immediately, his expression serious and intent. "Anything. Whatever you need, work is work," I said. "When we're in the office, I'm your assistant. We're professional. But after hours, after we close the door to that office, that can be ours." "Agreed," he said without a moment's hesitation. "That's a perfect place to start." We stood there for a long moment, a silent agreement passing between us. We were choosing to do this right, to proceed with care, with respect, with a conscious acknowledgement of the challenges we faced. We were agreeing to build our own world, with its own rules, inside the gilded cage of his. The next morning was entirely different from the one before. I had stayed, this time not in a guest room, but with him. Waking up beside him, with his arm draped protectively over my waist and the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing in my ear, felt like the most natural thing in the world. There was no unease, no anxiety. There was only a quiet, settled peace. We made breakfast together in his kitchen. The space, which had once felt so intimidating and sterile, now felt warm and welcoming. He showed me how to use the complicated espresso machine, his hand covering mine as he guided me through the steps. The gesture was instructive, but the warmth of his touch was deeply intimate. We moved around each other with an easy, companionable rhythm, The simple domesticity of the act, brewing coffee, making toast, feeling more profound than any grand romantic gesture could have been. This, I thought, as I watched him pour milk into my coffee, his brow furrowed in concentration, this is what it feels like. Not the dizzying rush of a fairy tale, but the quiet, sturdy foundation of something real settling into place. It felt like coming home. At 8 o'clock sharp, we walked into the glass-walled office. The transition was immediate and unspoken. He went to his desk, I to mine. The easy intimacy of the kitchen was replaced by a focused professionalism. He was once again Mr. Croft, the CEO, and I was Leo, his assistant. But underneath it all, a new current flowed between us. A shared glance held a world of meaning. A brief, soft smile across the room was a silent reassurance. We were playing our roles for the world, but we both knew the truth. In the weeks that followed, we built our life. We worked hard during the day, maintaining the boundary we had set. But at 5 o'clock, one of us would close the office door, and the world would fall away. We would have dinner together, sometimes ordering in, sometimes venturing out to quiet, out-of-the-way restaurants where no one knew him. We talked for hours, sharing stories of our pasts, our hopes, our fears. I learned about his lonely childhood, his difficult relationship with his father, the immense pressure of the empire he had inherited. He learned about my love for old books, my forgotten dream of studying architecture, my quiet joy in simple things. He never used his wealth to impress me. Instead, he used it to create space for us. He rented out a small, private movie theater so we could watch an old black-and-white film without interruption. He arranged for a private tour of a museum after hours, so we could stand in front of a painting I loved in complete silence. These were grand gestures, but they were always in service of quiet intimacy, of giving me experiences he knew I would cherish. And he was always careful, always asking, "Is this okay? Is this too much?" He never stopped working to make sure I felt like an equal partner in our burgeoning relationship. One evening, we were standing on the balcony of the penthouse, the vast expanse of the city glittering below us. A cool night air was blowing, and I shivered slightly. Without a word, Julian took off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled of him, that familiar scent of sandalwood and clean linen. I slipped my arms into the sleeves. It was far too big for me, a tangible symbol of the differences between us. But as I leaned back against his solid chest and he wrapped his arms around me, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a shield. I looked out at the endless sea of lights, at the millions of lives being lived in the city below, each one a small, separate story. For so long, I had felt like one of those isolated points of light, disconnected and alone. But now, held in the steady warmth of his arms, I felt connected. I felt seen. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against my back. I thought about the man in the lobby, the snapped wire, the terrifying walk to the penthouse. I thought about the first time his fingers brushed mine, the way my heart had leaped. I thought about the fear, the doubt, and the quiet, stubborn hope that had refused to be extinguished. I had been so afraid of his world, so worried that it would swallow me whole. I realize now, it's not about his world or my world. It's about the world we are building together, in the quiet moments, in the shared glances, in the steady, unconditional care. His age, his wealth, they are just part of the context, the scenery. They are not the story. The story is us. I turned in his arms to face him, the oversized jacket bunching around me. I looked up into his calm, gray eyes, which were filled with a deep, tender affection that I knew was just for me. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm, steady certainty. I was no longer the boy from the front desk, and he was no longer just the owner of the hotel. We were Julian and Leo, and this was our new beginning. "I'm thinking," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, "that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.